Welcome. This is Triaging Time, and I'm your host, Dan Luna. Today's guest, we have Cathy. Cathy Wahkinney is a licensed professional counselor. She lives in the Oklahoma City area, where she owns and operates Mindful Warrior Institute, where she specializes in therapy, training, organizing events, connecting individuals, groups, and team leads to wellness and resiliency resources with a focus on those in the helping professions. I love that, Cathy, helping professions. Cathy is a certified EMDR clinician, an approved EMDR consultant in training, image transformation therapy, basic trained, certified in critical incident stress management for individuals and groups, and a certified dynamic mindfulness instruction. Cathy graduated from the University of Oklahoma and completed her practicum requirement at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center through the Interdisciplinary Training Program at the Center on Child Abuse and Neglect under the direction of Dr. Barbara Bonner. Cathy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So, big question right off the bat. Life, leadership, volatility, and trauma, all small subjects. If we only had a few minutes of your time, what advice would you share with us?
I would say you can't pour from an empty cup, so take care of yourself first. And it's interesting because you said you liked that I work with the helping professions, or that I put it that way. And I would say it's like I help the helpers so they can keep helping.
I love it.
Yeah.
So before we really dive into things, can you just tell me a little bit? So I read a lot of cool qualifications. Can you just tell me in simple talk just what you do? Tell me a little bit about the Mindful Warrior Institute and kind of what your day-to-day looks like. And then from there, since we'll have a little bit of context, we'll just kind of go from there. How's that sound?
That sounds great. And is it okay if I tell you a little bit about how I got to Mindful Warrior Institute?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So I started out as a teacher, and then I transitioned into training for foster kinship and adoptive parents for the state of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And Oklahoma was so high in the incidence of child abuse and neglect that foster parents were actually committing. So the state of New York sued the state of Oklahoma, and because so many kids were dying in custody. And as I was doing these trainings, they started to become more and more trauma informed. And the numbers, though, were not dropping for the amount of kids in custody that were being killed or abused and neglected. Not allegations, but actually it was happening. So I started working with the foster kinship and adoptive families, the parents, and noticing that their adverse childhood experiences scores were sometimes higher than the kids that were in their custody. So I started focusing on helping them identify and resolve the trauma in their own lives. And that bled over into me becoming a licensed professional counselor. I worked inpatient, and a lot of law enforcement came in, which was a real surprise to me. Mm-hmm. And so the more and more I started focusing on these helping professions, and I was one in there too, so personally and professionally, knowing that a lot of times it's like we are, bleeding to death, but we're running around tying off everyone else's wounds because that's just what we do. Mm-hmm. And that's what developed Mindful Warrior Institute, is I started to find these different ways of mitigating trauma, stress, enhancing peak performance. And for these helping professionals, when they were coming in, and it's like they were overcomers. Everything that had happened to them when they were younger, they had overcome just by sheer force of will. Mm-hmm. But they just couldn't wrap their arms around some of this stuff and get it out of their system. And so that's where EMDR came up in my world, and working with the brains and the brain and the neuro networking and the body and the experience of trauma. And then they say, I read somewhere, I can't remember, I wish I could, but it says trauma is what's left in the body after the event is over. So.
And I know we talked a little bit about that before, I think off the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes, and then Peter Levine's work, The Unspoken Voice is one of his, where it's actually the body itself, the activation that happens. And then, of course, the polyvagal theory with Stephen Porges.
So it sounds like some of the stuff you're doing is generational trauma.
Yeah, I like that, like historical trauma. It's that, and then it's adverse childhood experiences. Okay. So those 10 categories that help identify, and it's not the only place that trauma can occur, but those are really, really important places, because when you're a child, all of the information is encoded at such a high level, because it's really, really important for survival. So it's the difference between like someone yelling in your ear with a megaphone and someone whispering in your ear. So when trauma happens in childhood, in that developing brain, it's not like the events are being poured into a brain that's already developed. Those events are actually structuring the brain. Yeah, and all the neural networks that fire together, they wire together, and they get super, super fast, and whatever's not used gets pruned away.
Yeah. Cathy, I guess what I'm curious about right now, and it's kind of funny, I'm getting ready to ask this. So originally I had you on and the focus was going to be on the helping professions. What I'm curious about now is actually the children of those in the helping profession. So how I typically describe this is, let's say you're law enforcement, military, whatever it is. So you work in a volatile environment, and now you come home. So you carry that baggage, if you will, back home, and you have those people that are always in your orbit, in your personal life. So now, have you done any work, or have you seen anything where how that affects the children of, or the kind of the residual effects of first responders when they come home, for really just for their own child, seeing maybe their way of life?
Sure. And I think some of it is the ability to name what's going on. So I know for me with my dad, which I was really scared when he was the police officer. I remember he had a flak jacket, and he was like, "Don't wear that outside." And I was like, "Why not?" I was about 8, and he's like, "Not everybody loves the police." And I remember being crushed, like, "What? People don't love police, you know?" And his answer to that for me was, "I'm bulletproof, baby. Like, I am bulletproof." But that's not true. So as a child, like recognizing like, no, you're not bulletproof, and having a lot of fear with it, I would say for those children, having that relationship with them where you're actually speaking and naming what's going on inside. But then you go back to that law enforcement officer, and like, what kind of experiences did he have when he was a child, and what coping mechanisms did he put in place, or she, so that they didn't feel fear, right? So when you're a kid, your ultimate state is powerlessness, and so you activate these survival mechanisms that stay in place for your entire life, and most people have no reason to unguard themselves from that. So being curious about, like, what are the patterns that I did pick up to deal with suffering or to deal with emotions? What were the rules in my house around feelings? Was it nobody gets to feel angry except for dad? Nobody gets to yell but mom, right? What happened in that environment with that developing brain that maybe is carrying over into patterns that are being played out between parent and child now?
Yeah, 100%. And how that now, if we were to fast forward in time, let's say that young person were to go into law enforcement in the military, so how does that childhood now affect them as far as resiliency, or maybe even prone to PTSD or those triggers that they never addressed from childhood? How are they showing up now in their workplace?
100%. And with patterns, a child will either adopt the pattern that the parent has, or rebel against it, or set their lives up to play it out so they can win this time. So what it might look like is, okay, my dad would not talk about feelings, so I'm going to rebel against that, and I'm going to make everybody talk about their feelings. My children can probably attest to that when they were younger. Like, if you're not aware of your own patterns and what this system is in your brain to deal with what you've been handed from your parents, and these traumas, this adverse childhood experiences score, they're categories. So have you seen it? I sent it to you. And you
do you mind going over it?
Yeah. So the adverse, it's Vincent Folletti, and it's 10 categories of just traumas that happen. So it's like a household member being imprisoned, having a parent that was an alcoholic or addicted to something, gambling, pornography, whatever. Separation from a parent, most devastatingly through abandonment, but also through death or divorce. Sexual abuse by someone 5 years or older. Not feeling cared about, not feeling loved or a part or belonging in a family. I'm not doing these off the top of my head here. I could get the sheet if you want me to, but
close enough.
Yeah. So you can look it up, but it's Vincent Folletti, and it would be of interest to you to know where it came from, because it's a really fascinating story. They were doing an obesity study, and they set these people up with like the foods and the exercise and the support, and all of these people lost a whole bunch of weight, and then there was this subcategory that gained it all back and then more. And Vincent Folletti was like, as a young doctor, I was my ego was not about to take that, so I decided to deal with these people who had failed this research study. And he said, I was really nervous, and I asked one of the participants, I mixed up the questions, and I said, how much did you weigh during your first sexual experience? And she said 40 pounds. And he was like, 40 pounds, right? Like, how old would you be when you're 40 pounds? And he realized that every single person that had regained the weight had some significant trauma in their childhood. So then Kaiser Permanente started this research study, and they researched 17,500 middle-class Americans who were insured. And like 60% of them had a certain, like 4 or more of these adverse childhood experiences. And they started doing more research, and actually there was an insurance company that hopped on too, because of course they want to know who not to insure, like who's going to die sooner, because they showed that if you had 6 or more, you were likely to die 20 years earlier than anyone else from suicide, addiction, risky behavior, all of that. So really interesting work about how childhood experiences affect and impact everything about your life until you uncover it and get it resolved.
And that's great. I love that you said that, because there's times where I'm working with clients and they'll talk about some experience from their childhood, and they're like, oh, but I just buried it. So we have this idea that we can just like, oh, I don't think about it, so it doesn't exist. Like, oh, I tuck it away. Like, no, even as an adult, it still shows up someplace. It's just not at the conscious level. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, feelings buried alive never die, is my motto.
Say that one more time.
All the way to the top. They're always trying to find their way out, because your system, your innate healing system, you're not meant to be locked up like that. Emotions come from the word emovere. It's a Latin word, and it means to move through. So your emotions are actually meant to move through you. And why it's especially significant for people who are in high levels of conflict, military, law enforcement, fire, where they're seeing a lot of trauma, and I would call that secondary trauma. Addressing primary trauma is important, because I compare it to like Russian roulette. The adverse childhood experiences, for every single one of those, is a bullet that goes in the gun. So what we want to do is unload that bullet. Your brain, because of the way that a child's brain develops, is developed based on those experiences. And so as we pull up, and that's what EMDR does, it like pulls up the memory or the information, and then just like a Word document, when you resave information on it and then you save it, it saves as a new memory. that neural network is corrected or repaired. All the information is there to be able to be stored appropriately. And so I call that unloading the gun. And people probably shouldn't say this. I said this at my last training though, and I was like, people get all butthurt when you start asking them about their childhood. They're like you said, like, well, that was a long time ago. Or like, my parents did the best they could. Or like, there's 100 of those things. But when you go back to your brain developed based on the things that happened to you, and you don't get a brain that's pre-programmed for what's going to happen to you in the future. You don't. For the experiences that are going to happen, you only have it from how it's been built.
Yeah.
And so, those planned communities, I used to live in Arizona, and you drive up and there's like a library and a school and a park. You're like, this really makes sense. It looks like somebody like sat down and planned this community, right? But then you go to New York and you're like, what's happening? There's like this huge city, and then these bridges. People were like, no, I want to live over there. No, I want to work over there. That's your brain. Your brain has to have these links and these connectors, and it hiccups. So the surprise is that any of us are handling anything that happens, in the world. Not that people come in and go, hey, I think I need a little bit of an adjustment. We spend more time on our cars,
So now I'm curious. So now when you look at childhood and you look at adult trauma, where do you... So let's say you're going to deal with somebody like me at 42 that may have had something in their childhood and then has combat experience or has been exposed to something that maybe they're trying to work through or navigate or figure something out. Like, where's even the starting point for that for you? Where do you normally start? How do you navigate that space?
So I would deal with a present situation. So let's say, for example, you came in and you were like, I have this certain feeling because of this combat experience. Like I keep on having nightmares or have a lot of anxiety, or I just feel like maybe I want to optimize. And I know that I have all this stuff in my brain. So I'm curious about it. I'm curious about the impact of it. So with EMDR and the other body work that I do, it would be about finding that feeling, that felt sense. Maybe it's powerlessness. Like I was in this experience and I felt very helpless. And we would find where you first remember experiencing that. Because what it's like in your brain when you're a kid and you have a lot of trauma. So if you have like 2 or 3 of these adverse childhood experiences, what you have developed in your brain and what has got a lot of tread on it is predicting, anticipating, seeking safety all the time. And what's pruned away is like spontaneity, playfulness, going with the flow kind of thing. And trauma in the brain is like, when people sing happy birthday and there's like one person who sings off key. And the only thing you can hear is like that person singing off key, right? That's what your brain is tuned for because it's built for survival. So when you're in combat and you hear that same song and it's off key, it's happening right then, but the volume is turned up to a 10 out of 10 because it's a song that's been played over and over and over again. So it feels like it's happening right now, but actually the impact of it, all of those bullets in that gun, are causing it to be implosive or explosive.
Okay.
Makes sense?
It does. So does that, have you found that link, maybe if I showed up with something, is there almost always a connection to something from the childhood, or are the two often separate? Like, hey, this was my adult experience and that's separate from what I experienced as a child, or is there almost always a connection?
In my experience, there's always a connection.
Oh,
so
wow.
Because the state of a child is powerlessness, period. Children do not have power. So even though there's fight, flight, freeze activated, let's say you have a mom who's a yeller, you don't have the ability to run away. You're a 7-year-old kid, so you run away on the inside or you collapse on the inside, right? And those felt sensations in the body of powerlessness, helplessness, terror are what is being experienced in something that's like combat related. So it's more the felt sense that's the same.
So you've mentioned felt sense a few times, and I'm actually starting to do this in my own work, just the distinction between sensing and feeling. Do you mind just elaborating on those two?
And for me, the distinction is between an emotion and a felt sense or a state of being. So a felt sense is like, people will say I'm anxious, like I have anxiety. That's not an emotion. It's a felt sense because you can pinpoint it. You can go, when I have anxiety, my heart is pounding, or I feel it in my tummy, right? Or my throat starts closing up. So as you start to name those feeling states in the body, that's really important, because a lot of the addiction, a lot of the behaviors that happen are in an attempt to change the feeling state. I could feel, right? I feel really anxious. And so as you start pinpointing those, and people they don't do that. I don't think naturally, we don't. I mean, we have a real aversion anyway to expressing ourselves in terms of we're polite as a culture. So if a child walks in somewhere and it stinks, they're like, oh my gosh, it stinks. They're like, oh gosh, it stinks, like little kids. But adults will just stand there like it doesn't because they don't want to be rude. And then they'll be like, stop. If you're a good parent, then you're like, don't pretend that it doesn't stink. So even expressing revulsion is really minimum. In our culture, it's more like, stop it. Don't do that. Don't get angry. Don't be disgusted. Don't. So that's part of what you have to learn. And for me, that's what I do. So for EMDR, how I explain it is like there are channels in the brain, and one of those channels is the sensory experience of things, everything that you smelled, everything, even the time of day, textures, tastes, it's all trapped with that memory, and it's in a different channel.
I've heard a really cool, almost description of resilience that I hadn't heard before, and it basically was a sense of aliveness. So reconnecting with your sense of aliveness, or wholeness, or bouncing back to that state of safety, security, belonging. So now what brings you back to that state? So if I'm pulled out of that state of aliveness and I'm in this survival mode, and now I have to be something to survive, vice my being of when I'm relaxed and I'm safe, that wholeness, that aliveness. So now you'll see things of, time in nature, helping others, things along different activities and hobbies. So now I guess what I'm curious is, what have you found in regards to sensing and feeling work for adults in the workplace?
So we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And at the bottom, it's like the physiological needs.
Can you just hit the hierarchy real quick?
So the bottom is physiological, like breathing, shelter, clothing, water, food. The one above it, it's a triangle, is safety and security. So it's like social stability, family, property, security. Love and belonging is above that. So that's family, a sense of connection. And then self-esteem is above that. That's achievement, the need to be unique or individual. And then self-actualization, what you're talking about, creativity, spontaneity, experience, purpose, meaning, inner potential, all of that. So sometimes what can happen is, because what we want to offer as helpers or leaders is love and belonging, we want to start there. Like, how I want to give this person a sense of belonging, I want to give this person a sense of connection, but that's not where they are. They're at physiological needs. They're at, I need to have my physical needs met. I need to be out of pain, for instance. I'm in chronic pain, and I need to be out of pain in order to be able to move to the next step, which is safety and security. So as an adult, what it would look like is addressing your needs at the baser levels. And moving up to love and belonging. Like, we drag people up to love and belonging. Like, no, I want to love you. And so we're going to talk about your feelings and your emotions and your heart, and versus creating a container of safety for them and security. And then for adults, the work that you do is to get curious about, because nobody chooses to go down to the physiological needs. No one chooses and goes, you know what, I think I'm going to, need food, water, shelter, just to be out of pain, to be safe. We lost our home in the 2013, May 20th tornado, actually, in Oklahoma. And this was an experience that I went through personally, where you're back to like food, water, shelter.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, we love you. And you're just like, I am about trying to find socks right now. Okay. Mm-hmm. And as I began to grow in the safety and security part of it, where, okay, I'm safe, I have somewhere to live, my kids are taken care of, all of that, then it bumps to love and belonging. So to answer your question, it's to really go back to those places where you identify, what kind of traumas have I experienced in my world that are unresolved? How could they be impacting me today? Because you will go into your natural response of fight, flight, freeze. Some of us will fight. If somebody jumps out from behind a door, some of us will swing. Some of us will shrink back. Mm-hmm. Some of us will be like, faint. So that's the best way to understand your life right now and your patterns. Look at your relationships. And if you don't know, ask your significant other, what patterns do I go into when I don't want to deal with something? Do I shut down, become a turtle? Do I become a hailstorm? Like, what is it that I do? Mm-hmm. Because you learn those patterns somewhere, and they were for survival.
Man, this is great. I'd love to keep talking about the kids, but just because of time, I'd like to pivot, if you're okay with this, and just talk about EMDR and just maybe some. I think you know a little bit about it, so if you can just give us some insight into it.
Okay. Let me get ready, because you said this is my show.
Or we can talk, it's your show, so we can talk about something else if you want.
No, listen, EMDR is my jam. So I'm like, I want to tell you about what it is, what it does, and why it matters. Because if I hear one more first responder go, what's EMDR? I'm going to cry, because I can't believe they don't tell them. So I'm going to tell you what EMDR is and what it does and why it matters. So in your brain, you have these different, this is how I explain it. You have these different channels of storage. And I'm going to give you a positive memory first. And I'm going to make it baking cookies with your grandma, because I used to try to be all like politically correct and do changing your oil with your grandpa, and I just couldn't make it last. You understand? I don't know enough about it. And who doesn't like baking cookies? Right? Right. So
even I like baking cookies.
What? Right? Who doesn't? Nobody wants to change their oil. Pay somebody to do that. So the image, if I said you baked cookies with your grandma every day after school in 3rd grade, it might take you a minute, but you'd be able to call up what you looked like in 3rd grade, what she looked like, what the kitchen looked like. That's the image. Okay. Okay. And then the sensory experience of it. Yeah. It's warm, like how warm the chocolate chips were, how sweet they were, the feel of your grandma's hug, her voice, the heat from the oven, even the time of day gets trapped in that sensory experience of it. And then you have the emotion. And now, you would not walk over and be like, my heart is so happy right now. But your mind, your brain would trap that information. It's in a separate channel, but it's trapped in the same memory network, in that neural network. And then the sensations. So again, you wouldn't walk in the mirror and go, my heart feels really full and warm, and my stomach feels open and soft, and my shoulders feel very relaxed. But your body is capturing that information. And then this is a really heavy channel. It's the belief channel. So kids are completely egocentric. They learn about the world and who they are by how people treat them and what happens to them. So that statement, that belief would never start with, my grandma is just a really sweet, kind person who has her priorities together and her life in order. That's why she spends time with me. This belief channel is, I'm important, I'm special, I'm loved. Traumatic experiences are stored in the same channels on steroids because your brain is built to survive. So it encodes it at a very, very deep rate so that you're prepared, so that it can make sure it doesn't happen again, and it's on the lookout. And it's like going to a park and seeing a snake one time out of 10,000. The next day, the next time you go to that park, your brain is going to look at every stick and think it's a snake, because it's less dangerous than looking at every snake and thinking it's a stick. So you have the image, and this is where people get in trouble. They're like, I don't even think about it. Like, I don't even think about it anymore. I did a forgiveness walk. It was like, I'm done with it. But remember, there are all of these other channels. So the emotions, the terror, the hurt, the anger, all of that is in a channel. The body sensations that go with that. My heart is tight. My stomach's tight. I'm all constricted. Same memory network, different channel. The sensory experience of it, everything about what it smelled like, tasted like, the touch, everything, the time of day. And then that belief, again, that belief channel that's super, super heavy. I'm unlovable. I'm not in control. I'm powerless. I'm helpless. I'm bad. And your brain is cobwebs, and so it goes and finds other information. So in this memory network, you go to the mall and you see an old lady and you're like, oh, that reminds me of my grandma. We used to bake cookies every day. Or you smell a perfume or a cologne, right? Or you hear a song from 20 years ago and you're like, how do I remember the words to that song? Or, hey, I danced with somebody, or this is my wedding song, or whatever it is, it activates that. The same things happen in this. Your brain is cobwebs, and it is meant to survive. It goes and finds other information. And then by the time people get to me, where they're at is they're at Target, and they're feeling the sensations and the emotions and all of that from this memory network. And they're like, this doesn't make any sense. And I can't talk myself out of it. I'm like, you're at Target, chill out. You don't need to be afraid. But the body is actually what's reacting in these channels. So trauma is a splinter in the brain. That's how I describe it. And just like if you had a splinter in your finger, you could walk around for years with splinter glass in your finger, reach down and be like, ow! Your body cannot fully heal until this foreign object is removed. And it's the same in your brain. So we look at symptoms as signals, right? So even with a splinter, it would try to push its way back out of your skin, right? Never had that happen? It tries to make, well, you don't have like a whale hole in your head so you can push all that other stuff out, unfortunately. So it does other things. It's anxiety, depression, insomnia, anger for no reason, feeling shut down. You know, I'll get people in who are either like, I want to punch every single person in the throat, or they're like, you know, I do still love my dog, but I just kind of like my dog. I don't really have a lot of strong feelings for anything. And so what I do, what EMDR does, is it activates this memory network, which gets stored behind what's called a trauma membrane. So behind this trauma membrane, no new learning can take place. Nothing can penetrate this trauma membrane. And it's alive all the time, circling around. So we shake it loose, and that memory is held like in a space for all of the information to get extracted about what you know now as an adult. So all of these beliefs, I call them like shelf 205. You don't need to know that you're loved and important and special in order to survive. So those get filed away on the lower shelves. The first 10 shelves are taken up by the adverse childhood experiences. So when this trauma happens, I'm going to say this is the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, fight, flight, freeze. And then all the other stuff, you know, like that you're loved and you're lovable, and that nothing that's ever happened has been about you. But when fight, flight, freeze is activated, the amygdala creates a baby gate. And none of that information is able to penetrate down here. So EMDR opens up the amygdala, allows the brain to let this information, which, you know, there's a part of you that's built in and bulletproof that nothing that's happened to you can ever touch. That resilience, that inner essence of who you are. And so what EMDR does is it allows it to become accessible. And then as it's accessible, it's able to be stored as just a regular memory.
Can you go into a little bit just on the specifics of how EMDR works?
Absolutely. So there are many protocols for it in terms of there will be eye movements. So I want people to understand, though, what I've been asked so many times. I'm glad you asked that, because they're like, okay, but like, what is it? So here's what it would look like. You would come in, you would sit on the couch, you would get grounded, you would have a target memory pull up. And your innate healing system knows what to go to. You would be amazed at how many people come in and they're like, I really think this is what is driving this anxiety or this insomnia. And then we track it back, and it's like when they were in the first grade and they got caught stealing M&Ms, and they had to stand in front of the class and apologize. And it started this first house got built on the block of I'm powerless. So with EMDR, the beautiful thing is we don't have to go house to house to house. We knock out the one house that has all the electricity and the Wi-Fi and the water. Yeah. And then the rest of the houses, they are demolished because they don't have what they need to be sustained. So that's the difference between EMDR and, like, say, talk therapy. Talk therapy is like, it's a tree, let's pull the leaves off. How long has this been here? Who was here when it was born? You know, that kind of thing. And EMDR cuts down the tree by the root because all the leaves will die that way.
Does EMDR work both for children and adults?
Yeah, it works for children and adults. And what you'd want to do is find somebody who specializes in either children or adults. I do not do children. They're so wiggly to me. They are. I'm too wiggly myself, so I can't handle it. But yeah, they have these little puppets that do the eye stuff. So let me tell you what happens. So you activate that target memory, and then you work through it with these eye movements, and it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay.
And you can either do eyes, and it'll be you just following fingers, or I use tappers a lot, and they're just like these little buzzers that buzz back and forth. Or you can tap on their legs. So, but either way, you're being guided through each of those channels to deactivate them and put them to rest.
Got it. Wow. So once again, I'm looking at the clock, and it's going by really fast, which I'm glad. It just proves how great this conversation is. What I'm curious as to now is what are some things that you share with groups, with teams, that with these helpers, with people in the first responder world? What's something that they can do collectively to really support or help each other out?
You know, I think something that's been powerful that I've talked to with teams is that you can't take people further than you've gone yourself. And that you really have to find a blind spot coach. You know, the unknown unknowns are what get us. And so I do, I'm an inspector for the Athletic Commission, and I wasn't into cage fighting or anything like that until I wasn't. And I saw this cage fight, and this coach was on the outside of it, and he was telling the kid, turn your ankle 1/4 of an inch to the right, turn it to the right. And this kid's locked up. I mean, he's about to tap out. And this coach, he can see everything, and he can work him out of this hold. And so this kid does it, and he ends up, you know, being able to get free. And I thought to myself, I need somebody like that in my life. That I need somebody who can see from the outside and be able to tell me how to move in this situation. So I would say find a resilience buddy, like find someone who won't let you just talk the talk, but that requires you to feel things and to do the work and to grow, not just to give it all away. Because that's what I found in the helping fields, is that we stay busy giving it all away. And unless you purposely find somebody that you trust, and it has to be somebody that you trust, to tell you, listen, maybe look at some of these. Just be curious about it. What are some patterns that you have today in your life that are familiar from when you were a kid? And use each other as those blind spot coaches.
Is there something that we have not discussed yet that we should have?
No. Can I say one more thing though about the adverse childhood experiences score?
Yes, please.
I would strongly, gently suggest that everybody look up adverse childhood experiences and take that quiz. Just take the quiz, know your number and what it is, and think about if each of these is a bullet in a gun, and I'm playing Russian roulette. How many bullets do I want in that gun?
Yeah. So some people I know have all of them. And I've done this test with some folks. What advice would you have for somebody that's high on that spectrum?
So I would say find someone who does body and mind work, like that has a body-mind connection experience.
So you're talking a little bit about somatics? About working, using the body and working through the trauma that way? Is that, so when you, okay. So you do some of that as well, correct?
Totally. Yes, and I'm a dynamic mindfulness instructor.
Okay.
So that's also using the body, you know, my videos and stuff where you're discharging activation. You know, there's a book, actually, I would say even if you don't find a therapist, there's a book by Peter Levine called Healing Trauma. And his big thing is like, you get hurt in relationships and you heal in relationships, and I'm big time on that. But even if you just looked at it, it's about restoring the wisdom of your body. It's about clearing out that old stuff that you don't even know is there, and some stuff that people do know is there, but they think it's not affecting them. They're kind of like, oh, that makes me a better dad because my dad sucked, and so I'm like dad of the year, right? Versus, no, giving it away doesn't get it for you. You don't fill up here by giving it out there. You can't pour from an empty cup. You cannot give away what you don't have, and you can only give out of what you've gathered in your heart. So if all you've gathered is doing something in opposition of how you were raised, that's not you getting to be who you are and operating from an authentic place. It's you adopting a pattern or rebelling against a pattern, or setting it up so that you can win this time. And I'm in the business of freedom, like bringing light into the darkness, not just grinding through and doing it better than it was done to me.
So I have two more questions, and I'm hoping to squeeze them both in. What are some, so now kind of zooming out high level, what are some high-level practices? So if somebody's listening to this show right now, what's something that maybe you could share that they could start implementing right now, or just some general advice that you've seen? Hey, typically it's, you know, these are things at work and that can help right away. Is there anything like that?
To connect more with mind-body type stuff?
What am I asking? I guess what I'm trying to ask is if there's a specific takeaway, like, hey, if I'm at the end of this, what is something that for me as an adult that I can start implementing right away? Hey, I can take this quiz. Is it just start noticing? Is it start noticing my, start looking at emotional patterns when I'm at home, when I'm at work? Is there a recommendation or something that you use with folks that you work for that, like, hey, this is kind of like the step one is awareness, and this is a practice that I have people do?
Yeah, so one of the things that you could do right away, taking the adverse childhood experiences stuff, and then there's a body scan. Have you ever done that, the body scan? And it starts to get you connected with your actual body and the sensations that you experience throughout the day. So I want you to pick the person who is like your biggest annoyance. And so we know that people are our mirrors and our messengers. Mm-hmm. So if you pick the person who like, this is really a struggle for me, it's a challenge, and sometimes it's a child, one child out of 3, or it's a parent or a sister or a coworker, but focus on that person and write down who they remind you of.
Okay.
The first time I remember feeling this way was blank, 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 and blank. And then call a therapist and be like, and I want you to go back as far as you can. Like, when's the first time I remember feeling this way? Mm-hmm. And remember, feelings buried alive never die. They claw their way up to the surface. They beat on the windows.
I love that.
Yeah. So figure out what's clawing around inside of you.
So basically, everyone go find a therapist.
Well, not necessarily. That healing trauma is a great one. I'm really a big time believer in system, like allowing people, us as a society, and also just people and organizations having these systems in place. This is why I love Peter Levine in this book. Mm-hmm. And there's a CD that goes with it. You could go through all 12 of them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, though, you need a guide. For me, okay, I'll ask you a question I ask all my clients day one. If you were dropped into a wilderness and you could only have one thing with you, what would you want?
My first thought is a knife.
I would want a guide. I'd want someone who had been there and knew their way out, right? And knew where the shady spots are and where it gets extra, extra hard to get through, where the rest spots are, where it's safe. Mm-hmm. That's what I would want.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
I would have the knife, then the guide. In case I need to threaten the guide, I have my knife.
Okay, no.
I'm kidding.
You can have my answer, though. But so
I do like your answer better.
I might need a guide to go, to help me move my way through this. Mm-hmm. So there are tons and tons of places that you can go. Psychology Today is a place that you could find a therapist, and you can put in there like EMDR. I would recommend doing someone who's certified in EMDR, and you can go to emdria.org. It's EMDRIA.org, and you can put in your place where you're at.
Okay.
And then I want to tell you about this other resource. It's called Open Path Collective, and it provides therapy. Like, I was on Open Path Collective. I have a client through there, and they guarantee their rate to be $30 per session or $50 per session for couples. Like, so there are people that sign up for that so that everybody can have access to different types of therapy or modalities. So that's another resource you could get on.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So I pride myself on starting on time and trying to end on time, and I'm breaking that rule because I have one more question. And if we can, try and keep it short. Is there anything, so I've talked to you a little bit about this idea of pre-traumatic coaching, so trying to get ahead of it or build up, not armoring, but like create an awareness, create these habits, tease out these patterns. Like, all this work that we're talking about now, why are we doing it after the fact when it has now reached a critical incident? What are the things that we can do beforehand, especially for people who work in that first responder, that volatile environment? What's your thoughts on that? And then do you have any advice, maybe for me as I try and pursue that route? So this is more of a selfish question.
It's not about you, Dan.
I know.
No, I'm kidding.
In this moment, it is, though. It's about me.
Oh, wait, it is about you. Okay. So the first question about the pre-traumatic, I would say if we could just, as a people, have this awareness that we are impacted by the things that happen to us, you bring yourself wherever you go. Mm-hmm. So as people walk in the doors to these trainings, these rookie places, right, that we look at them and we go, they are bringing themselves wherever they go. So let's see what they've already got. If they're already at a 6, it's going to take them this much to get to a 10. So we want to equip them as much as possible by clearing out. And, to even know that it's possible to deactivate that stuff in your brain and in your body, to reroute and to create new neural networks. They're reparative. That's reparative work. It's actually deactivating these neural networks and building new ones so that that's even possible, right? I think explaining that with the pre-trauma, and you're going to have to help me with the butt hurt part of it, because I don't know how to explain that. But when you start talking to grown men and you're like, yeah, when you were a kid, these things affected you. And it's like, how dare you? How dare you say that, right? Yeah. But eventually they come around, because if they are aware at all or awake at all, they do. So I would say stop getting butthurt about people saying that your childhood impacted you, because you have no problem going, oh yeah, my dad taught me how to do this and I do it in a positive light, but it's just more difficult. That's why you need that coach that goes, hey, this is what's going on, and that you trust. And then for you personally, I would say take the adverse childhood experiences test, see where you land, and then call me. Okay. I'll make you a referral or what. We'll talk.
Yeah, I love it.
Be curious. Be curious about how you've been impacted. I have not yet sat down with a first responder and then not gone, oh yeah, my dad was an alcoholic, or my dad was emotionally distant, or my mom was, an alcoholic or sick, or in some way I experienced a trauma. A control freak. I mean, even that's traumatic for a kid. So to step back from it and go, hey, I don't know what happened, what patterns there were, but I'm going to be curious about it, because it's about me getting to be me versus reacting in these patterns.
Man, this was great. Cathy, do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Let me think about that. I think we've covered it. This was really easy, a lot easier than I thought it was going to be.
Great. I'm glad.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you. Once again, if you know someone who could get something out of this conversation, please share the video with them. And of course, like and subscribe. These things help a lot. Spread the word. And remember, you don't manage time, you manage yourself, and leadership starts with you. Thank you.